We do want to begin with that announcement from the Prime Minister just in the last half hour or so. He is in Toronto today, where he announced a new bail reform bill that aims to crack down on violent and repeat offenders. Carney talked about the changes and what it could mean for those in the legal system.
We're making bail stricter to keep you safe. With so-called reverse onus bail, it will no longer be up to the Crown to prove why someone should stay behind bars. It will be up to the accused to prove to the court why they can be trusted to be released. Their risk of reoffending and their history of past 10 years will be considered.
That was the Prime Minister speaking, and of course, Janice McGregor was listening into that from Ottawa. Okay, let's first talk about that announcement, Janice.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to call this a course correction or a reform to the previous bail reform. Whichever way you slice it, the rules are going to get more strict. You heard the Prime Minister there explaining why. During sort of the previous government under Justin Trudeau's leadership, they were concerned about over-incarceration, particularly for certain groups, Black, Indigenous offenders. But an acknowledgement with these changes today that perhaps things swung too far. People were feeling too safe. Certainly premiers, federal conservatives cite example after example, highlighting instances from the news where a repeat offender was released on bail, able to commit additional crimes, and the community consequences that have resulted. And so we see today a series of changes. You heard the Prime Minister talk about reverse onus, that being basically in a nutshell, that you need to prove that it's okay for you to be out on bail, not sort of that it's up to sort of the prosecution to explain why you need to be released. That change is sort of a fundamental way of thinking. I hope I said that right. I'm questioning my words there, but basically the pressure is on sort of the person who wants to be released to prove that they could be released safely, and not the reverse. Also, this would introduce consecutive sentencing. This is something that some people believe they have to proceed very carefully on. There have been cases, Supreme Court cases, where they have ruled against consecutive sentencing, this idea that sort of you can't kind of lump things together, that you would sort of get a sentence for one crime, plus after that a sentence for another crime, plus after that a sentence for another crime. This is something, again, also that federal conservatives have called for, feeling that it isn't right, that sort of, you aren't doing the time for all the crimes that you have committed. Also, we see here that they are going to increase penalties for organized retail theft and also change the rules around conditional sentencing, again, trying to address concerns, particularly from victims of crime, about people serving conditional sentences back in sort of the communities in which perhaps the victims live, and feeling that sort of they are unsafe as a result, wanting people, those conditional sentencing not to be available to people who have committed some of the more kind of heinous crimes. And along with that, the need to increase police resources. There was a pre-budget measure that was part of this announcement today, that they would be hiring 1,000 more RCMP personnel, and also capacity within the RCMP to combat particular things that have been a problem: money laundering, online child sexual exploitation, organized crime, car thefts, and so on. And this funding intended to improve training, talking about more resources specifically for the recruitment of new RCMP cadets and the facilities in Western Canada for that training. So this recalibration, if you want to call it, coming under pressure, but nevertheless, the Prime Minister today signaling that this is a case where they heard the feedback and they're taking action.
We work closely with law enforcement, with municipalities, with provinces, and we take the lessons from what's happening in the streets, in our communities, in our cities, and we're making changes. So yes, there are things that are being changed from measures that previous governments had put in place, but that's the right thing to protect Canadians, and we will continue to do that.
Something to watch in the House of Commons, though, when Justice Minister Sean Fraser introduces a bill, expected perhaps next week in the House to implement these changes now announced, is who supports it. Of course, this is a minority parliament. We know that the Conservatives were coming forward with a bill of their own, pretty high in the private members' business schedule in the House this fall, which also would have been about bail reform, introducing things like reverse onus for bail. If the Conservatives were going to do this anyway, how could they not vote in favor of a bill that the Liberals are bringing forward to do it? Pierre Poilievre often sort of has encouraged the government to steal his ideas if they want the Conservative support. We will see when the bill is introduced if they meant it and if this can get speedy passage as a result.
And of course, we know the federal government, they took note saying that we are taking lessons, recalibrating was the word that you used. And they're also perhaps taking suggestions from provincial premiers who were among those who were calling for these changes. So will this satisfy their demands?
Yeah, and here it's interesting because the Prime Minister is meeting with Ontario Premier Doug Ford on several topics, but he signaled that this being one of them later on this afternoon. Doug Ford, as chair of the Premiers, really pushed for bail reform, wrote a letter, again, emphasizing the need for that. His government did last month. But there were some things that, for example, a Premier like Doug Ford has called for, mandatory minimums, that don't seem to be included in what this legislation is rolling up. So they're not perhaps getting everything they want. But the minister that's going to have to front this bill, Sean Fraser, the Justice Minister, is in Alberta today hosting a meeting of federal provincial ministers responsible for justice and public safety. Consultation with the provinces when you are changing bail rules is so important. If your courts, if your prosecutors, if your corrections system, your jails, your detention centers do not have the capacity to handle having more people behind bars, not released on bail, then what you're trying to do isn't going to work. So they have to have a very kind of careful coordination when they change things in the criminal code, when they change direction be given to judges about releasing people on bail. They have to make sure the correction system writ large, which isn't just federal, is able to actually do this. Nevertheless, these other levels of government have been asking for this, so one presumes that they are going to be pleased to see the criminal code changes. And I guess the question is now formulating plans for resources and capacity to make sure everyone can follow through.
Janice, thanks for this. That's the CBC's Janice McGregor in Ottawa.